This short screencast will take you through the process of doing an automatic thought record, which is a tool that can help you take control of your thoughts and as a result, help you start feeling better. No one likes feeling anxious or sad or angry or any unpleasant emotion. And even worse can be not knowing why we feel this way. But keeping an automatic thought record is an easy way to start identifying the automatic thoughts that are triggering these unpleasant emotions and test these thoughts or maybe adjust them a bit so they'll have less of a negative impact on our mood. Now, there's lots of various automatic thought templates out there on the internet, but really you don't need anything fancy. Just a simple piece of blank paper divided into a bunch of columns will do the trick. One column for date and time, one to describe the situation, one to describe your automatic thoughts, one to describe the emotions, one to put in your thoughts for an adaptive response, and one to describe the outcome. So step one, think of an unpleasant emotional situation. Now, when you're thinking about the situation, really try to replay the situation in your mind. Where were you and who was there and what was happening? Try to really zero in on the time that you started to feel crappy and then ask yourself, what was the thought that just flashed through my mind right now? To help you out with this, we'll work through an example. This is Megan. She noticed one night that as she was going through her Facebook and looking at all the various messages, she was about to message some people, and then she just started to feel really low and crappy, and she couldn't figure out why. So she took a step back and thought, okay, what am I doing? What just went through my head right now? And she realized what she had been doing is she had been about to respond to a message from a guy in her class that she kind of liked. He had said, hey, maybe we should hang out sometime, and she was about to ask if he wanted to go for coffee. But then she started to feel crummy. When she zeroed in on that moment, she asked herself, what's going through my mind right now? And she was able to identify that the little thought that flashed through her mind was, he thinks I'm a loser, he'll say no. Well, no surprise that made her feel crappy if that's the thought that was going through her head. So what she did was she took her automatic thought record and described what was going on, and then she put her automatic thought as, he thinks I'm a loser, he'll say no. Step two is to identify the emotion. Now that you've identified the automatic thought, identify the emotion associated with it and how intensely you feel that emotion, 0 being not intense at all, and 100% being the highest intensity imaginable. Understandably, that thought of being a loser made Megan feel pretty darn bad. She identified her emotion as being sad, and she felt it pretty intensely, about 90%. Now is where the rubber hits the road. This is where you develop your adaptive response. What you're actually doing is asking yourself a bunch of questions to sort of look a little closer at this automatic thought and maybe pick it apart a bit. So questions that you can ask yourself is, what is the evidence this automatic thought is true or not true? Is there an alternative explanation? And if it is true, what's the worst that could happen and how would I cope with that? And what's the best that could happen? Okay, and what's the most likely outcome? What's the effect of believing my automatic thought? And what would be the effect of changing my thinking? And if I were my friend or family in this situation, what would they do? You also need to go through and give a percentage score to how much you believe each response. 0% is not at all, and 100% is completely. So going to our example for Megan, well, she doesn't really know if John thinks she's a loser, so she's going to give that about 50%. And she sort of thinks, you know, he said we should hang out sometime, which suggests he doesn't think I'm a loser. She actually trusts that about 60%. Okay, worst case scenario, he thinks I'm a loser, says no, and makes fun of me to his friends. This is a pretty strong thought for her, actually, and she believes it about 60%. But the very best case is he says yes and we have fun. Believes that about 40%. The most likely outcome is he'll say yes, regardless of what he thinks of me, because he's a nice guy. Well, and this guy must be a pretty nice guy because she believes this 80%. And if she keeps up this automatic thought and keep assuming he'll say no and that he thinks she's a loser, I'll never ask and I'll just feel sad and lonely. She believes that pretty strongly, so at least she has insight into how this thought is affecting her. And if she changed her thinking, she does recognize that she could go out and have fun, and she believes this pretty strongly. She also recognizes that if a friend were in this situation, she'd tell her, of course, go for it, and that guy'd be dumb not to like her. And she recognizes that she believes that about 80% as well. So you can see going through these adaptive responses, you don't need to believe all of them, not even close, but it's going through them all that can help you get to this next step. This is where you try to identify the cognitive errors that were behind your automatic thought. Cognitive errors are the faulty logic behind our automatic thoughts, and there's lots of different types of them, and we all do them. The key is to recognize them and be able to correct them when they're making us feel bad. So there's lots of types of cognitive errors, which include all or nothing thinking. That's along the lines of I have to be the best or it's just not worth it. There's also catastrophizing, thinking that if one small thing goes wrong, everything will go wrong. There's personalization, taking an outside situation and thinking somehow it applies to you personally. Like if the cashier at the store was rude to you, it's all because of you and not them. There's emotional reasoning where you let your emotions tell you what's true. If you're feeling sad, it must be because you're a loser, not for any other reason. Labeling, which is just believing yourself as a loser. Magnification and minimization, which is where you focus on the bad things that have happened and you sort of dismiss the good things. Yeah, well, maybe I got, a good mark on that test, but it was an easy test. It doesn't count. Mind reading, thinking you know what's going on in other people's heads. Overgeneralization, an example of that could be, well, I didn't do well on this one test, so I must be stupid. And of course, everybody's enemy, should and must statements. So, when Megan tried to figure out what cognitive errors she had present, she noticed she had labeling. Yeah, she called herself a loser. She was catastrophizing when she thought he would make fun of her to all his friends. And she was mind reading because she really didn't know if he thought she was a loser or not. Okay, so now that you've identified the cognitive error and you've tried out some adaptive responses, go back to your automatic thought. How much do you believe it now? And give that a score out of 0 to 100%. What emotions do you feel now and how intensely? And most importantly, what are you going to do? So for Megan, she recognized that her automatic thought strength had actually decreased down to 40%. Her emotions, however, were a lot better. Her sadness had gone down to only about 30%, and she actually had a little bit of hopefulness. And her plan was, you know what? I'll give it a shot and I'll text him. So in summary, to do an automatic thought record, the first step is to think of an unpleasant emotional situation and identify the associated automatic thought. Then you identify the associated emotion, and then you evaluate the automatic thought, including looking for the cognitive error, and then you reassess. Challenging your automatic thoughts and looking for the cognitive errors won't always make you feel wonderful, and don't expect it to work like magic right away. You might actually find yourself still kind of believing your automatic thoughts, like Megan did. But over time, identifying and challenging your automatic thoughts will get easier, and you'll actually start to notice that the automatic thoughts associated with the cognitive errors start to happen a little less frequently, which means a happier and healthier you. And I think we can all agree that feeling happy and healthy is the best way to be.